Welcome back to the Hockey Axe podcast. I am Mason Hackle. This is the podcast dedicated to studying the best athletes in the world and the best hockey players in the world, dissecting what they can do and making their abilities accessible to you so that you can enhance your performance and play better or just live a better life. And I wanted to, this thought literally just came up right now, but I think I have enough proof at this point that I can make this claim and debunk the other notion that comes with a claim like this. Excuse me. I'm actually eating my dinner at the same time, so I apologize if you hear me munching and cleaning up stuff. But okay, here's the thought. And I think it's one of the most talked about when you think about skills training or mechanics work. And the thought is like this. Well, at what point does your skill work translate to in-game results? Like, where is the proof that this actually happens and that the skill work by itself can eventually translate to in-game results? And like, that question has popped up time and time again. And I realize now that we have enough resources at our collection to say that it actually does happen. And here's how it works. So you don't need to look at things very hard in order to find out this pattern, that it actually does show up. One of the first things that comes to mind at the moment, even though I don't like this example personally, is Trevor Zegras and what he practices on specifically. You'll notice that he has the most Michigan-style lacrosse goals at the moment. But you'll also, if you look back at what he practiced in some of his other highlight reels, that he works on this more than anybody else. And that's gotten me thinking that, well, if he can do it in games more than anybody else, even though it's only like once or twice, maybe maximum 3 times a year, and obviously like he has his own problems, but regardless of that, if he can produce this tactic in games, and then it shows up with other players because he's not the only person to score that type of goal. Well, isn't that a skillful play, first off? And secondly, you had to work on it, and then it translated into a game. So it's like, but that's just the reason that I say that that's not my favorite example is, again, because Zegras has his own issues. I think he's, in my opinion, working on the stuff that doesn't produce the same things that you see with something like a Connor McDavid or a Sidney Crosby. But here's the catch. The work that those two players put in, and same with guys like Nathan MacKinnon too, anybody who's producing at the top of the league right now and has produced at the top of the league for years and years prior, like a Crosby or McDavid, to a degree a Kucherov too, they also work on skills, and clearly it's translating to in-game results. I don't think I need to say anything more. Like, that is your proof. That is why we look at the best players all the time at Hockey Hacks and a bunch of my other colleagues as well. That's exactly why. It's because it does produce in-game results, actually. And to say that it doesn't, or to even question it, I think is actually the wrong question. Because nobody has been able to repeat what these players have done. Otherwise, you would see more of them. And there aren't more of them. There's a top 0.00001% of these players instead of masses. So it's like, clearly people have not figured out what these guys have done, and they're projecting their own failures onto them and onto you, which I think is a disgrace, because they say, oh, skills actually don't translate to the game. What's your definition of skills? Is it the skating mechanics? Is it the Zora plays? Is it the lacrosse style goals? Is it stick handling mechanics that are fundamental to catching passes and taking shots as well? Is it quick release style shots? Is it, I don't know, jumping like a figure skater? What's your definition of skill? What's your definitions of skills that translate? That's the question here. People are mixing up, and I don't know, like they're trying to project their own definitions of skill onto other people, I suspect, because I suspect they are projecting their own failures of not learning the skills of guys like McDavid, guys like Crosby, guys like McKinnon, every other best player that has ever showed up in the past 5 to 10 years. Matthews can be in there as well. They're projecting their own failures of not learning what these guys have done onto you. Coaches and other players alike. Coaches and other pros alike. The pros who actually don't want to get better and project their own failures onto you. Just because, well, they're not in the NHL. That's not my problem. That's their problem. What I am doing is literally all I'm doing. It's just bringing to light these game transferable skills, these skills that these best players have that were not taught to me. And I know were not taught to other players as well. And all I'm doing is just making them more accessible, because that's what I wanted. And that's also what I needed for my goals of originally playing pro hockey, and making the NHL too. Obviously that didn't happen to this point, but I know for a fact that if you get these skills that do actually translate, and we have a growing proof of those skills translating into games from directly training them with all of our youth players, and sorry, not all of my youth players, but like youth players like with Kevin McKinnon at Train 2.0 Ottawa Valley. Also, a bunch of other kids inside of Train 2.0 itself, my colleagues there, just to give them a quick shout out. Once they started working on these mechanics, it then translated into games. So I think that's the problem. People are mixing up their own definitions of skill onto what we're producing here. So honestly, the next time that I see any mention of, oh, is this going to translate into a game? It's like, I've already answered that question in this podcast. I'm either going to refer it to this podcast, or if they're the ones who are, being rude, because it hasn't been me. I've never been rude. If they're the ones being rude and saying like, useless stuff, useless, unproductive stuff, it's like attached to the point that it's like, when did these skills translate into games? Like, where's your proof of that? Because it hasn't happened on you. And it's like, no, it's showed up with other players because I'm always referencing the best players. And that there's a reason for that, is because I don't want to learn what is common and what everyone else has done. I want to learn what the best have done, because clearly they have done something different. Whether you can immediately see that or not. But after doing a bunch of digging, been able to see that they're doing something different. And to close the gap, to those comments, I've already answered that question. That's what this podcast is for. So it's like, there you go. I've said my piece. They do translate. They just don't see it because they mix up their own definitions of what skill means. I know I brought up the Zegras example that I don't like, just because he has his own issues. I suspect my main suspicion is that Zegras is working on skills that don't translate compared to a McDavid or the other players, which I already mentioned. But clearly, he has a skill move that has translated into NHL game, because in both cases with guys like McDavid and guys like Zegras, they practiced stuff more than anybody else, and it produced in-game results. They practiced something that you could clearly be able to do in an NHL game and do it repeatedly. So it's not enough to just do it once. You have to be able to do it repeatedly. That's the problem with Zegras, by the way. He's not doing it not repeating it to the same degree that a McDavid can repeat it. But McDavid is able, he has found skills that he can repeat over and over and over again and continue to dominate the NHL. McKinnon, the same thing. Crosby, the same thing. Kucherov, the same thing. Matthews, the same thing with his goal scoring. Ovechkin was the same thing with his goal scoring too. They found little skills, whether you could notice them or not, that clearly, after working on them, translated to games and were repeatable. You could do over and over again and over and over again. Like, it's just, they've done it so much. They've done those little skills so much. They've done it more than anybody else. Maybe there's more to it, but I think I would rather go with the simplest explanation that fits the facts. And this is that. We don't need to fucking complicate everything. You just look at their movements, copy them yourself, and you're going to be 90% or more of the way to performing just like them if you focus on moving exactly how they are moving with every single skill that they do. Because that's what mechanics is. It's movement. So that's your formula. That's why the thought that, when does this translate to in games, is honestly stupid. And there's your debunking of it. It's a dumb thought, honestly. Maybe it's not a dumb thought, but it's definitely lacking a growth mindset. And I'm seeing that it's actually lacking evidence. There's more evidence to suggest that by finding the skills that actually do translate, you get better results. Because there are skills that translate. People just don't look hard enough, and then they project their own conclusions that, I haven't found anything enough, so it must not be out there, when they're really just looking in the wrong place. I found something. And that's to be known. You can't take that away from me. I have found something. All of my colleagues have found something. And we'll leave you with that. I want to thank you for listening. I will see you next time.